And without any further delay, I want to welcome to the stage. We're going to talk data, RevPAR, ADR, occupancy, all that fun stuff. Please welcome to the stage Jan Freitag, STR, and Mark Woodward, CBRE.
Thank you. Good morning, all 10 of you. Thank you for being here. No, honestly, we appreciate that. He always puts us on first because we're the draw. Are we? Yeah.
Boy, look out, yeah. Look.
I mean, clearly we're the draw. So, thank you for being here. Right? So, thanks, Lee and Teague and Bob, specifically Nancy, for having us back. 31st year. As Bob keeps reminding me, STR was there at the beginning, so appreciate the long-standing relationship. We each have 22 minutes to give you the State of the Union, the way we see it. I want to kick it off with, basically the standard overview that you're used to if you have been to Hunter for 31 years. So Mark and I sort of made the rounds last night and talked to a bunch of you about sort of the main topics, and you heard yesterday from a bunch of panels what are the things that are on everybody's mind. It's sort of, it distills around one topic. Yeah, you're all looking at your bracket. Let's be honest. If you're looking at your lap for half an hour smiling and shaking your head, I know you're not listening to us. You're doing something different, which is fine. So we're going to call on you every once in a while to say, hey, look up, this is important. So hope you have a good March Madness. The last couple of years, this presentation was kind of really easy, right? Because life was good or great, depending on where you are, and that's not really the case anymore. So the tenor of my presentation this morning is basically I want to talk about the good, the bad, and then I want to talk about the weather, actually. So let's start with the good. The slide that I had, my opening slide last year, is actually the opening slide this year. So in 2018, the US hotel industry had more rooms available than ever, sold more rooms than ever, generated more rooms revenue than ever, had the highest ADR occupancy RevPAR ever. Ta-da, records. And as Mark said 2 years ago, that just means we're at a plateau. We're not going to fall down the mountain on the other side. It's just sort of a slow and steady, continued tiny growth numbers, but continued growth. So I hope that I can use this slide again next year if you invite me back. So here's where we're at. So this is 12 months rolling through February, and so as if the year had ended in February, and really not a big surprise, right? Supply and demand are in balance in favor of demand growth. So supply growth is now at 2%. You saw the February numbers actually 2.1 for the first time in ever. We're breaking 2%. Room demand 2.4%, so still at basically 9 years into the RevPAR upcycle, we're growing room demand, which is amazing. And so that means then that mathematically occupancy is increasing, so we're selling 2 out of 3 rooms every night on average for 1 year running, which is the highest occupancy we've ever seen. And of course, weekends are a lot stronger than midweeks. So the industry is basically full, which should breed pricing power, which is what we've said now for I think 5 years running. We're going to say it should breed pricing power, and we haven't seen it yet. And we're going to talk about that. Mark has some interesting slides about that as well. And yeah, so 2.3% is, it's there. It's growth-ish. It's just not anything to write home about. And then you add that all together into the mix, you get RevPAR growth of just under 3% or so, which is basically the tenor that we're projecting going forward. So if you've been here through 31 years, you've seen this slide 31 times. This is the standard STR opening slide, the interplay between supply growth and demand growth. You see the last 3 recessions, 91, 9/11, 2009. You see that every time room demand rebounds very, very strongly, and then right now you're seeing the dark blue line outpacing the teal line, so demand growth is above supply growth, so that means that occupancy continues to increase. But you're seeing that those two lines, the delta between those two lines is narrowing, and we're actually projecting those lines are going to meet on an annualized basis at the end of this year. So yeah, so far so good. There's still room to grow occupancy. Your mileage may vary. If you're in a top 25 market, you probably won't, because there's just so much new supply there. The difference there is actually supply growth is outpacing demand growth by 100 basis points in the top 25 markets. But overall, you see, that's still good news. Demand growth is still pretty healthy. And then you take supply and demand growth and put it together you get occupancy percent change. And again, you see here every time in a recession, occupancy drops further. 1991, 9/11, 2009. Every time occupancies decline, and then therefore rates also decline, and then they rebound back. And we're currently in this sort of slow and steady decline in growth on the ADR side. It's still growth. It's just not a whole lot there, so 2.3% or so. But overall, that then gets us to this. We're now 108 months into the RevPAR upcycle. It's actually only been 107, so it's been positive 107 out of the last 108 months, because September last year was negative, as you may remember or don't want to remember. So all the Wall Street analysts were like, oh my God, we're all going to die. It's like, nope, it's 1 year. So it's 1 month, and that's it. So we're going to break the former RevPAR record, growth record of 111 months easily this year, because we're all projecting continued positive RevPAR growth going forward. So now we're 107 months into the 108-month growth cycle, and that's amazing, right? So you heard, if you were here yesterday, a lot of the senior operators and owners are saying, well, it's kind of getting long in the tooth. But then you also heard Adam Sachs saying, there's really no reason why these upcycles can't extend. If you look at Australia, I guess they have a 27-year, positive cycle. So it's not something that has to end unless there's an external shock to the system, which let's hope there's not. And then we're really projecting that things are going to be okay going forward. So then you break it down by class, and now a lot of you play in the upscale, upper midscale, midscale segment. The thing that I find amazing about this chart, and this looks at supply percent change and demand percent change annualized through February, is the demand percent change in upscale and upper midscale. It's basically 2x the national average. This is amazing. Like we're 9 years into this cycle, and we're growing demand on the upscale side by 4%. Yes, there's a lot of new supply, of course, to accommodate that, but I think that's just an amazing, amazing number given how late we are, in the cycle. Now, the problem, of course, is that you see that in certain instances, the supply growth outpaces the demand growth. But let's just marvel, at the power of this industry and at the strength and resilience of this industry, that we continue to generate new customers. And so you see the blue bar is positive across the board in every chain scale. Yes, there are more new people. Room demand continues to grow. And then what does that give you? Really high occupancies. So this is upper upscale, the big meeting boxes, such as this fine hotel, selling over 7.5, almost 3 out of 4 rooms every night for a year in a row in the 9th year of the upcycle. So very, very full hotels, and we don't really see that changing very much. You see that they're not quite as full as they used to be, but they're still really, really full. And you see that going down the food chain. Very, very strong occupancies across the board. Look up from your phones for a minute. I think this is a really important chart. So what I'm showing you here is the interplay between group and transient ADR percent change. So for the upper end of the market, we're asking, is the room that you're selling sold in increments of 10 or more, it's called group, or increments between 1 and 9, we call transient. And I'm charting here purely how much more room rates are expensive. What is the ADR growth for group versus transient rooms? And in February, this last data, this just came out 3 days ago, group ADR growth was like 4.5% or so. It was really, really strong. And it lifted the annualized number. And I'm really curious about how this chart is going to continue to go. Because think about this. We are STR. We know everything about yesterday, right? We don't know a whole lot about tomorrow, but we know everything about yesterday. So the group ADR that transpired, that we report on today, was arguably negotiated, 3 quarters, 5 quarters, 7 quarters ago, right? And it materializes today. So when I look at that upswing in group ADR percent change, I'm thinking, oh, a year ago, a year and a half ago, revenue managers, general managers were really bullish about the industry today and saying, hey, we're going to be pretty full. Let's just increase our room rate, right? Because we have such a long lead cycle. We look forward and we're like, yes, beginning of 2019 is good. We're full. Let's increase ADR. Okay. So, but then you're looking at the transient ADR percent change. And that growth is, sort of slowing. It's a little bit more tepid. And what does that mean? Well, the booking window for transient rooms is, what, like a month, 3 weeks, 2 days, So what does that mean? That revenue managers a month ago are not feeling quite as confident about the industry today than they did a year ago. I think this is really an interesting indicator of psychology more than anything going on in the market. And I'm very, very curious to see how those lines continue, because the group ADR is baked. That's it. The groups are coming and you negotiated them. So I'm very curious to see as the summer progresses where group ADR goes versus where transient ADR goes. But right now, interesting, development and group is rocking and rolling, and groups are here, as Adam Sachs mentioned yesterday. What else is good? Pipeline, because, well, there's not really anything there, right? So pipeline growth, 2.1%, 190 plus thousand rooms in construction. That number hasn't really moved in the middle of 2018. The percent changes month over month were always 0 point something, so the pipeline was basically flat. And where are we today? 2.1%. Why is that? Well, it turns out actually like 1 or 2 big projects can move the needle. So Marriott finally decided to be on the Strip, and they broke ground on the JW Edition, 4,500 room project out in Vegas. And yeah, that moves the needle. Not singularity, that's not a single impact, but you see that that number actually changed the percent change in December last year. So, am I worried about this chart? No, I think this is good news, right? All of you out there, you want to be in here, you want to be in the development side. You have a good spot, you have a good plot of land, you have some financing, you have a good brand behind you. You're like, well, except TWA Hotel, obviously. But you have a good brand behind you, and you're like, hey, this makes sense for us. Our hotel makes sense, and we don't see a whole lot of competition coming. With exception, maybe, if you're limited service, because obviously 7 out of 10 rooms in the STR pipeline are indeed, limited service. We're not building, ballrooms anymore, I used to say. So luxury upper upscale, very limited new supply. But even, the pipeline overall, even though 7 out of 10 rooms are limited service, the total number of rooms under construction is really not that high. And Mark has some interesting comments about that later on. So we feel very good about the fact that we're not going to overbuild in this cycle. And then here's our forecast. If you saw Adam Sachs yesterday, he said we're awesome at forecasting, and I appreciate that since he does it, so he does it for us. We give him our data, and he has a black box that he spits these data back out at us. So here's what we're projecting. For this year, supply and demand in balance, which means our occupancy change is 0, but 0 at the highest level ever, right? So even if this is 0.001 positive, it's going to be the highest occupancy ever recorded, ever. And then that gets you to pricing power-ish, so ADR up 2.3%. And then for next year, yes, indeed, the supply growth, even though it's not very strong, will indeed outpace the demand growth for the first time in, I guess, since 2009. And the occupancies are going to decline. But again, decline that's sort of a very strong word. They're going to flatten out slightly negatively. And we're seeing then, therefore, that ADR growth is not going to be quite as aggressive as we had seen it in the past. But overall, positive RevPAR growth going forward. So, that said, you probably use this saying in your own company if you massage it long enough. It'll confess to anything. So here's the same data, but not so good. So if you look at the January ADR percent change, really hard to see, it's so small, 0.8%, the lowest ADR growth since May of 2010. So that's not good, right? We need to drive our top line in order to drive our bottom line. So we at STR, we do a lot of fancy math. Here's some fancy math, so bear with me here. What we're doing is we're creating real ADR. And what real ADR means is we're taking the absolute level of ADR growth and we're subtracting from that CPI, the Consumer Price Index, the rate of inflation. Basically, how much are things more expensive? And you're saying, that's not fair, Jan. Hotels aren't consumers. They don't buy cars and diapers and whatever. And like, yes, I get that. But just as a proxy, so bear with me here. So real ADR is the difference between ADR and CPI. And so then we're plotting real ADR growth. So if the bar is above 0, that means we're actually adding ADR growth on top of CPI, right? So in the mid-90s, we were able to grow real ADR by 3 or 4% or so. Post 9/11, over 5% on top of the rate of inflation. Wow. So a lot of pricing power in the mid-20-teens, 3-4%, until it's really hard to see, but there's data on the far right-hand side, and it is actually negative, implying that CPI grew faster than ADR. And that, of course, is a problem. And to frame this slightly differently, is the topic that came up yesterday. I have no doubt that we can plan hotels, finance hotels, build hotels, but who's going to clean all the rooms? That's the big question. I'm based in Nashville, and to me, that is the governor of the Nashville industry. Like, that is going to put a damper on growth in Nashville. We just can't find people. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says, hey, we have over 1 million open positions in accommodations and food service. True, that includes restaurants, but guess what? They have a restaurant here, so we're competing for the same person. So that is really a problem. We're going to find 1 million people. And then what does that do, right? Because you try to hire the same person you're trying to hire, you're actually going to increase wages. And this is, again, just straight government data. Bureau of Labor Statistics is saying, look, ADR growth, blah. Wage growth for non-supervisory employees is up 5%. And that's obviously a problem, right? Because if you drive your top line 2+% and your expenses go up, 5+% or so, that's not going to end well for profitability. So this, to me, is the chart that matters most today, and that was basically on every panelist's mind yesterday. What else isn't good? Well, you're seeing that half the classes are losing occupancy now because supply growth outpaces demand growth, despite the fact that demand growth is very, very healthy. But that doesn't bode well for pricing power for upper upscale, and upper midscale going forward at all. It's already 1 point something, and I don't think that's going to be any stronger going forward. What else isn't good? We all want smaller government until we have no government, right? And then it's like, oh, wait. CBD ADR, RevPAR in January in Washington down 6% or so. I'm not showing you San Diego or Oak Ridge or Norfolk or the other markets that you're in that suddenly said, oh, that government group is actually good for our base. And if they're not coming, we have a problem as an industry. What else isn't good? Well, more people are traveling than ever. Emerging middle class in China and India, everybody's on the road. And as Adam showed you yesterday, unfortunately, the US is losing share. This has to do with the exchange rate. I think it has also to do with the rhetoric out of the administration. But this, this chart from US travel, the green line, the US share of global long-haul travel, is pointing downward. And this is also a problem because this is easy money. Let's just get them in here and take their money. They want to spend it, if we can make ourselves more attractive. So those are things that are really, really not good. All right, let me switch topics slightly and talk about the weather. This is not our chart. This is from NOAA, the National Atmospheric and Oceanographic Administration. In 2018, we had $14 billion weather events where insurance is paid out over $1 billion. And you've heard of the northeastern eastern winter storm, Hurricane Florence, Hurricane Michael. I wasn't aware of the Colorado hailstorm or the southwestern drought, but they're events and they happen and they have impacted some of your clients, maybe some of your hotels. It turns out that this is not an outlier. In 2018, 17, and 16 were 3 of the 4 most active years for billion-dollar disasters. I'm not good at math, but I see a trend here, right? This is not just, oh, the weather is bad. No, the weather is really bad and going to continue to be really bad and impact this industry. And why am I saying this? It's because when people get displaced, they look to hotels to provide food, shelter, communication, electricity. We're not first responders, but we're kind of first responders, right? If somebody's house gets wiped out, they look to us for assistance, And I just grabbed a bunch of random Google headlines and weren't hard to find because this happens now every year, that hotels are places that provide shelter. The US government has a website, FEMA evac hotels, just for hotels that are opening up during evacuations. So the impact on the industry is clear. Room demand in the areas that get hit by climate change events is through the roof, right? Hurricane Harvey, Texas demand up 17%. And you see the other numbers here, and I just picked a bunch of random events. Every time, Hurricane Irma, Florida, demand up 6%, Florence up 10%, and of course, Katrina, you all remember, Louisiana, demand up 10%. So this is happening, and this is impacting, well, A, it's impacting our numbers. So when you read our reports, you're like, oh, wait, did something happen last year? So the comps are getting really funky. But overall, it's just this massive influx of people, that we need to accommodate. Our friends from Analytics Group, a consulting shop out in Colorado, did this interesting map. They took NOAA flood maps and overlaid them with where hotels are, right? We have a nice hotel database with lat longs, so we can plot where hotels are, And NOAA is saying, hey, look, 31%, 1 in 3 hotels in the US are in low-lying coastal areas, and if there's a 6-foot storm surge above high normal, you're going to get flooded. 1 in 3 hotels. That's probably you, right? One of you. I know it's one of you. So the question is, for you, how do you function off-grid multiple days? How do you get access to staff, right, when there are no roads? How do you get access to food, water multiple weeks? Can you retrofit your hotel to be more resilient? This is not about not using straws. This is about having emergency generators and being ready when people look to you to provide help. And then I think a topic that's a little bit under-talked is, how does this fit your evaluation models? If you're buying something, are you thinking there's going to be a greater fool, who's going to take it off your hands before the next thing hits? How do you underwrite increasing the insurance costs? All those things, I think, need to be talked about much more. So with that said, yes, we're at records. The growth rates are slowing, but there's still growth, so that's great on the top line. The problem is our bottom line is shrinking because labor, and labor are the 3 most important things we are talking about here at this conference and throughout your operations. And then lastly, resiliency matters. So if I can leave you with a takeaway, make 2019 the year of resiliency. Thank you very much for your time.